Hello, wonderful person. Aaron speaking, and in this video we will be talking about functions. Up until now, all of the equations we saw only contained one variable. A function is going to be an equation or a relationship that relates an input with an output, which is just a fancy way of saying it will be an equation that contains two variables. Or sometimes you might just see one variable with the other variable being function notation. So let me write an example. Now, functions are going to be really important to understand because writing an equation, being able to write and evaluate an equation or a function is going to be extremely important when it comes to solving a lot of problems related to algebra. So for this example, I'm going to write a simple function f of x is equal to 3x plus 2. This is a function written in function notation. So what does all of this mean? X is just going to be our input variable, whereas our output would be f of x. And I'm writing it in this notation because this notation may show up on the actual exam, GKE. Sometimes you might just see something simple as y is equal to 3x plus 2. This is also a function. What makes something a function is when each input has exactly one output. So again, these are both the exact same function, they're just written in different notation. This is using function notation, and this is just written as a standard linear equation, which is also a function because it's relating two different variables. Now, the way a question related to functions could show up on a test is they could give you a function such as this first one I wrote and they could ask you to evaluate f of 3. And what this means is using the function given, which would be in this notation, it basically means instead of x, your input is going to be the number that they give in parentheses, which is 3. So f of 3 just simply means plug in 3 for x in this equation. So now I'm going to rewrite the equation, but wherever I see an x, I'm going to replace it with a 3. So instead of 3 times x, now I'm going to put 3 times 3, because keep in mind, a parentheses is the same thing as multiplication, plus 2. And now all I have to do is evaluate this expression. So 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 plus 2 is 11. And that's how you evaluate a function. Now, sometimes you might be required to, the question could be write a function based off of a problem that they give you, or it could be to write and evaluate. So I have a sample problem down here that we'll work out together. So Bill gets paid $2,000 a month plus $300 for each car he sells. So the first part of this problem is going to be to write a function with that given information. They'll most likely give a lot more information inside the problem because they do like to give extraneous information to make things a little more complicated, but right now I'm just trying to keep it simple, straightforward, so that you understand the concept. So if you're the first thing you would have to do is identify your two variables. What is going to be the input and what is going to be the output? Because again, a function is something that relates two different variables or some input with some output. So the output for this problem is how much Bill gets paid. So this is going to be the output. And the output in function notation is written as f of x. So let me write that on top. And the input, let's read the problem. So Bill gets paid $2,000 a month plus $300 for each car he sells. So the amount he gets paid depends on the amount of car he sells, which means the variable that's affecting his salary is the car he sells. So this is going to be your input for the function. So let's call that x. So the amount he gets paid. So now we need to come up with some kind of expression or a function that relates the amount of car he sells, which is x, with the output, which is f of x, how much he gets paid. So he gets paid, reading the problem again, he gets paid $2,000 a month. So let's write 2,000 plus, because they say plus, $300 for each car he sells. So what that means is you're going to multiply the number of car he sells, which we said it was x, by 300. So it's just going to be plus 300x. And there you go. That's going to be your equation or your function that relates the number of car he sells, which we identified to be x, with this output. And I wrote it out in function notation with f of x, but we could have gotten the exact same thing with, let's say, S is his salary. S is equal to 2,000 plus 300x.
It doesn't always have to be f of x for it to be a function notation. For it to be considered a function, it could be any variable. Just again, whenever you have a function, it's two different variables. The only requirement is that there's an input and an output that are separate from each other. So the next part of this problem is evaluate for 11 sales. So how much money would he make if he were to sell 11 cars?
And that's just a matter of plugging 11 into this equation for x. So the amount of money he would make, so f of 11, just like we did on a previous example, would just be 2,000 plus 300. Now instead of writing x, I'm just going to write 11. And that's equal to 2,000. And then 300 times 11, that's going to give us 3,300. And then 2,000 plus 3,300 will give us $5,300. So again, one of the hardest parts about functions is actually writing the equation to start off with. Because that's something a lot of people have trouble doing first. So just keep in mind, the first thing we did here was identify what is our output and identify what is your input. Because identifying your variables sometimes is the hardest thing to write an equation. It's impossible to write a function without doing that first initial step. After you identify the variables, the next step is to identify how are they related. And that's always going to be given in the wording of the problem. So that's one thing that could be tricky, is interpreting the wording of the problem and converting that to an equation. But once you get used to writing an equation based off of the information, then that's going to help you with a lot of problems
with this exam. I know it's possible to solve this problem without actually writing a function, but being able to write it down helps you visualize why exactly that process works. And this is something that will help you with almost every single algebra related problem with the exam. So thanks for watching. That's all I'm going to talk about today for functions. Hope you learned something. And have a nice day. Stay awesome, and until next time.